Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Dalid in Shavuos, as we learned from Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael and Sum L'Sar V'Shivya, and specifically for the Aliyas Neshama of my great-great-grandmother, Rivka Bas Harav Shlomo HaKohen, the daughter of the first Radomsker Rebbe Tefer Shlomo's yahrzeit. 108th yahrzeit is today. We're at the about the 10th line down on the page, 10th or 11th line down on the page on Daf Dalid. Gemara says like this at the beginning of the line, but Malcolm to Rabbi Shmuel, we said yesterday, who does that Mishnah go like? It can't seemingly go like Rabbi Shmuel or like Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Shmuel said that when it comes to a shvur, you're only chayiv on our relative on the future, not on the past. And we said you're chayiv both for future and past. That's Shtaim Shein Arba. And according to Rabbi Kiva, the idea of Yediyas Atuma doesn't work out, because he says you're only chayiv if you forgot that you were tummy when you went into the base of Mikdash Kachim, but not if you forgot that this is Kachim or this is the base of Mikdash. Who does Mishnah come out? So it goes like Rabbi Shmuel, and Rabbi Shmuel could be speaking in a case, and I'm going to explain the way Tosfos explains it, that in cases where it doesn't work out to have a korban olav, we'll talk about Malchus, where you was Edom and Asra, and you did it on purpose, and that's why you get. And that's what the Mishnah is speaking about, Malchus. The Gemara is going to have difficulty with that too, but at least according to Shmuel, that could work out partially. So the Gemara says, "My come to Rabbi Shmuel, well, a Malchus, Mars to go by Malchus." One of the four things mentioned in the Mishnah, we talked about Yediyas Atum, we talked about Shabbos, we talked about Shavuos, and we talked about Maris Legoim. If you see if you detect a spot, a leprous spot on your skin, what Malchus is there? If you're Tameh, the Kohen, you have to go through the whole procedure, and you're locked up, and you're secluded, you're quarantined, and you have to wait till you come to be checked again. What's the Malchus there? Ma Malchus, he says, but Kos is bros if you cut it off. You're not allowed to cut off your the famous question, if you have a tsaras on a place of bris milah, what do? You have a mitzvah to do the bris milah, to cut it off. You have a losa, you can't cut it off. A whole discussion about that as the chalosa say elsewhere in Shas. But anyway, we have here what losa say is there. Kosabras if you cut it off. Okay. Where does it say you can't cut off megas? Because it says Hishama b'negas ras. Hishama pen val. Even though it doesn't say lo, like lo tignov, lo tigsol, if it says Hishamer or pen or al, ain't a losa say, that's a losa say. So here also by tzaras, it also says Hishamer b'negas ras. So it's a losa say, don't cut it off. All right. What about Yetzias Shabbos? Even though Yetzias Shabbos was mentioned first and before Magas Ram in the Mishnah, but Yetzias Shabbos is more of a lengthy discussion. So therefore, he mentions first Nega, Marash Legam. What losa say is there by Yetzias Shabbos? Meaning what's Malchus? Of course, it's a losa say, but where's Malchus here? Yetzias Shabbos, my Malchusika. If we're explaining that our Mishnah goes like Rabbi Shmuel, and you interpret it according to cases of Malchus, where it's not a korban olav yoreh. Korban olav yoreh is only when you did something b'shogeg, as we'll see, right? My Malchusika was Shabbos. Lavshin l'saras misas besim. A losa say where you're supposed to warn him, don't do this aveira, be machal Shabbos, or you're going to get skila. You don't get Malchus for that. You just give him a warning for skila, not for Malchus. Kol lavshin l'saras besim. Ain't look, you don't get Malchus. That's why that's why we decided. The Gemara is like, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. That's why the Gemara said to say it will explain. Mishnah goes like Rabbi Shmuel and not like Rabbi Kiva. We said does Rabbi Shmuel or Rabbi Kiva, who can't come out like either one. Oh, we'll say it's Rabbi Shmuel, and where there's no korban olav yoreh, because he holds that by the shvua is only on the future, lahara lahativ, that I'm going to do something or not do something positive or negative, but not on the past. We'll say he's speaking about where not the case of shogeg, but rather a case of mesid, where you were warned. Okay, so we said, yeah, but what about on Shabbos? What is it there? The answer is our Mishnah. We prefer to say goes like Mishmah like Rabbi Kiva. We'll see Rabbi Kiva. We could also say with Malchus said go Rabbi Shmuel Damar Lav Shin Lasas Besin Lokan Lav. Rabbi Shmuel holds that a lav that you're supposed to warn him about Misas Besin. You're going to get skila if you machal Shabbos. If you warned him about Malchus, he gets Malchus. So therefore, the Mishnah, that's why we said Mishnah goes like Rabbi Shmuel. So if it wouldn't, that's the reason why it comes out, because we want to say that our Mishnah, when it doesn't work out to a case of korban olav yoreh of a shogeg, it'll be a losa say where you did it on purpose, you get Malchus. By Shabbos there's no Malchus. No, Rabbi Shmuel holds that there is Malchus by Shabbos if you were warned from Malchus. That's why you wanted to say the Mishnah goes to Rabbi Shmuel. So if it wouldn't be for that point, wouldn't be, because Rabbi Kiva holds lav shin asas bezin ain't malkin love, so it wouldn't come out like Rabbi Kiva. Lavachi kamik Rabbi Kiva. You would try to set the Mishnah goes like Rabbi Kiva, and we prefer to say Mishnah goes like Rabbi Kiva because most of the Talmidim, Rav Meir, etc., usually a Stam Mishnah, they live with Talmidim Rabbi Kiva, right? How could you go goes like Rabbi? Even if it wouldn't be for that point, that's your only kasha, because what? How is Malchus going to come out in the case of Shabbos like Rabbi Kiva? Because Rabbi Kiva is lav shin asas bezin ain't malkin love. There's no Malchus there. What about the first kasha we had on the bottom of Gimel Amud Aleph? Kasha Yedias. Remember, because how does Yedias? Rabbi Kiva holds that you're only chayiv on Tumas Mikdash for Kodshav if you forgot you were Tamei. Not if you forgot this was the base of Mikdash or you forgot this was Hekdesh. What about that kasha? You have that kasha. The answer is lava. I mean, Rabbi Shmuel, didn't we explain that Rabbi Shmuel goes to Malchus? Didn't we say, and when we came out that it comes, maybe it goes like Rabbi Shmuel, and we're not speaking about Korbanol V'Yored of a Shogi, but rather Malchus. Rabbi Kiva Nami Malchus. We'll say also Rabbi Kiva is also not talking about a case of Korbanol V'Yored, which according to him is only applicable in the case of Shogi by Yedios in the future. When you forgot Tuma, and not when you forgot that it was the base Mikdash that was Kadosh. We'll say it's also the Malchus. Yedias. So what means the Yedias there? If we're talking about by Yedias Atuma, we're talking about getting Malchus for on purpose going into the base Mikdash when you were Tamei. So the Hasros mi boile, it's not Yedias, it's not that you forgot. In other words, the case of the Pashup Shah in the Mishnah, you forgot it was the base Mikdash and you forgot you were Tamei, you went to the base Mikdash. You forgot that it was the base Mikdash while you were Tamei. So if we're talking about Malchus, that's talking about where you did it on purpose, you were warned. So what's the Yedias? It's not that you forgot, you knew you forgot. You were warned. And when it comes to warning, right, warning is only if you were warned and you were told you're Tamei, don't go into the base of Mikdash. So what Yedias are we talking about? Of course you knew. Says Rashi at the Rashi said it before. Rashi said, right, what kind of you have to be warned. Hasros, it should have said if you were warned, you're going to get Malchus mi boile. Says Holokasha, Tani Yedias Hasros. The knowledge of the Hasros, you knew that you were Musra, you knew you were warned. So Yachi Shnaim Shein Arba Tartiu. So what is 2 which is 4? The Mishnah said there's 2 which is 4. What's 2 which is 4? The Pashup Shad is if you hold 2 which is 4. What are the 2? You forgot you were Tamei and you went into the base of Mikdash. You forgot you were Tamei and you ate Hagdish, or you knew you were Tamei, but you forgot this was the base of Mikdash. You forgot this was Kachim. But if you're talking about Malchus, right, there's only 2. You were warned that you warned that you were Tamei, don't go into the base of Mikdash. You warned you were Tamei, don't eat Hagdish. Vesu as sheyesh b'yidi b'tchila v'yidi b'sof. We're talking about when you had knowledge at the beginning and you knew at the end. V'helam time and you forgot in between. Halom Malchus may. What do you mean you forgot? You don't get Malchus if you forgot. You're Malchus only if you were warned immediately before you did the action and you did it against the Torah. You get Malchus for that. Vesu harei zebol v'yorei. How does it work out? The Mishnah said in these cases you get Olaviore. Now you might ask, Tosas ask, what about you could have asked this kasha on Rabbi Shmuel also if you learn Malchus. The answer is Rabbi Shmuel could learn some are Malchus, some are Olaviore. But according to Rabbi Kiva, how does this case of Olaviore work at all? There is no Olaviore here because we're only talking about Malchus. And that doesn't work. We said Harei Zeh ba'Olaviore. It says that's what the Mishnah says. V'yediyah b'sof v'helmei time Harei Zeh ba'Olaviore. We're talking about Yediyas over here, right? That's the Mishnah said. The Mishnah in the 5th line. Shaim shein shvu shaim shein arba. Yediyah stom shein arba. Shabbos Yediyah shaim shein arba. Mars tigam shein arba. And then he says Ashesh b'yediyah b'chil b'sof v'helmei time Harei Zeh. There's no Olaviore according to Rabbi Kiva. Elam Rabbi Yosef. So this doesn't work either. In other words, it didn't work too well with Rabbi Shmuel, as we said. Because Rabbi Shmuel, you have to say it's a lav he holds lav nitten lasaris bestin. You do get Malchus. Okay, so you could explain it according to Rabbi Shmuel, but according to Rabbi Kiva, it wouldn't work out either way. Even if he would hold that lav nitten lasaris bestin ain't Malchus love, you'd still have problems with Rabbi Kiva. Elam Rabbi Yosef, Rebbe he. You know how Mishnah goes like? Not necessarily Rabbi Shmuel, not necessarily Rabbi Kiva. Goes to Rebbe. And he goes according to Tanon. Be a Dias, when it comes to Dias, Nasal like Rabbi Shmuel. He holds like Rabbi Shmuel who holds that there is 4, right? He holds not like Rabbi, he holds that Yedias are Yedias of I forgot I was Tomei and I went into the base of Mikdash, or I ate Kachim, or I knew I was Tomei, but I forgot this was a Mikdash, or I forgot this was Kachim. He goes like Rabbi Shmuel who holds that there are 4 there. B'Shvuos, where Rabbi Shmuel doesn't hold of 4. Why? Because he holds Shvu is only on the future, not on the past, right? On the fifth, he can't go like Shmuel there, but Shvu holds like Rabbi Kiva. So that's what we're saying. That in other words, he explains The Mishnah goes like Rebbe. Our Mishnah is Rebbe. Obviously, he was the editor, and therefore he said, okay, when it comes to ideas, he went like Rabbi Shmuel. Then when it comes to Shavuos, he went like Rabbi Kiva. I said this answer of Rav Yosef that Rebbe said the Mishnah partially like Rabbi Shmuel, partially like Rabbi Kiva. I said, don't say that he said the Mishnah, he mixed up the Mishnah. You know, as he said the Mishnah, this halacha is like Rabbi Kiva, this halacha is Rabbi Shmuel, but Rabbi himself doesn't hold that. No. Ella Rebbe Tamid Nafshem Farish. He's explaining his own. In other words, Rabbi Shmuel effectively is saying, Rebbe is saying, this answer is effectively saying that Rebbe holds himself like Rabbi Kiva when it comes to Shavuos, and he holds like Rabbi Shmuel when it comes to Tumah, when it comes to Tumas Mikshva Kashav, the Tanya. How do we know you're only chayav a korbanol v'yoret if you knew at the beginning, you forgot, and then you remembered at the end? In other words, you knew at the beginning you were tamei, then you forgot you were tamei, and you went into the base of Mikdash, and then you found out afterwards. Obviously, you found out afterwards, otherwise you wouldn't bring a korban. How do we know that? It says in the parsha, Vayikra, it says v'nelam v'nelam twice. So how do you darshan that? So Rashi explains, Rashi at the bottom of the last line here, and on the base, it says like this. It says twice v'nelam, right? So the first one is dafka l'migmar minei al helam tuma uchayev. Rabbi Kiva learns you only chayiv on helam tuma, not on helam mikdash. You only chayiv if you the korban v'yored if you forgot you were tamei and you went to the base of mikdash or you ate kachim, but not if you forgot this was the base of mikdash, because it says v'hunelam on that v'nelam imenu, you were tamei and you forgot. Right? The first one is to tell me that you're only chayiv on helam tuma, not on helam mikdash, not like Rabbi Shmuel. That's what Rabbi Kiva holds. And the second one is to tell me you're only chayiv if you knew you were tamei before you went in. Let's say a guy never knew he was tamei. He was tamei, but he never knew. And he went into the base of Mikdash. So we said in the Mishnah on Shabbos Daf that other karbanos that you bring, karbanos sibur that they bring, karban musaf, etc., will be mechaper for you. You don't bring a korban avol if you only found out after you went into the base of Mikdash while you were tamei that you were tamei. If you never knew you were tamei before you went in, you don't bring a korban avol. So that's what he's telling. That's what the two nouns. One is to tell me that you're only chayiv on helam tuma, not on helam mikdash. Only when you forgot that you were tamei, not when you forgot this was the base of mikdash. And you're only chayiv if you knew about it before you went into the base of mikdash. That's how Rabbi Kiva learns for now. Rebbe learns it differently. The last line of the page in the Gemara on Amud Aleph. Rebbe Omer ain't tzarich. You don't need that. Harei Omer, it says v'nelam. When it says v'nelam, mechalto yada. If you forgot something, you can't forget something if you never knew, right? If you never knew something, you never knew. Vanilla means I forgot. That means you knew. V'hu yada, and then it says afterwards, v'hu yada, you knew. So what does that mean? It can't be speaking you knew afterwards. Otherwise, obviously you found out afterwards. Otherwise, you wouldn't bring a korban. Harei kan shtei yedios. Im keimat hamalim v'nelam. In other words, why v'nelam? L'chayiv al helam tumah al helam mikdash. He says it says nelam twice. Once on helam tum, if I forgot I was tamei and went into the base of mikdash, or I forgot. I knew I was tamei, but I forgot this is the base of Mikdash. So that's how Rebbe learns. So Rebbe basically learns like he himself learns when it comes to Tumah. It comes to Tumas Mikdash, he learns like Rabbi Shmuel. He himself holds that. Here you see Rabbi Kiva argues with Rebbe. He would argue with Rabbi Shmuel too, but he argues here with Rebbe. So we can say Rebbe goes like Rebbe. You don't have to say Rebbe holds like Rabbi Shmuel in that case. Rebbe in the case of Tumas Mikdash V'Kochav, that what they do that there really is for. Rebbe himself holds that way because he darshans the pasuk differently. Rabbi Kiva learns it one way, that the nelam is only on forget Tuma the nelam Tuma below Tumas Mikdash. And the second one is to tell me that you had to know first. Rebbe says, no, you don't need that. It says now, obviously he knew. You don't have to tell me a pasuk, tell me Nelm. So I know that there's two. What does it say twice? So Rebbe holds that way to say Ashkan B'Yedias is the Gemara in the fourth line. Ashkan B'Yedias, this like time and Afshay. So fine. When it comes to Yedias Atuma, we know he holds his own svara, which is basically what Rabbi Shmuel would hold too. But you don't have to say he goes like Rabbi Shmuel. He himself holds that way. Shavuos, the less late time and Afshay ben Shavuos, we don't find that Rebbe says anything halacha about Shavuos. We want to find out how does Rebbe. We want to say when it comes to Shavuos, he will hold like Rabbi Kiva's shita, right? What's Rabbi Kiva's shita? that you're chayiv both on the shtaim shein arba, that there's two in the future, two in the past. If I swear I'm going to eat, I swear I ate yesterday. All that you're chayiv on you're chayiv all of you, all right, on all those cases. Where do we find the Rebbe says that? Shavuos less the time of Shem and Olam. Svara, it's a svara. What's the svara? Skip the parentheses. Rabbi Kiva, my time come chayiv l'shavar. Why does Rabbi Kiva say that you're chayiv both on the future and the past? The Darish Ribu Yomid. There's a famous machlokas throughout Shas. Do you darshan klal prat klal, or you darshan Ribu Yomid? Now, of course, in the Yugam Midas that we say every day, Taner Rabbi Shmuel Omer Shloshis Midos, Ribu Yomid is not mentioned. We'll come to that later on. But in general, there's a klal to you darshan Ribu Yomid. What does Ribu Yomid? Ribu means Ribu is an amplification. Miyut is a limitation. Something is more inclusive, something is less inclusive. Or do you darshan with klal prat klal? And why does Rabbi Kiva say you darshan that all four things apply? Meaning, I swear I will eat, I swear I won't eat, I swear I ate, I swear I didn't eat, all four, because he darshans Ribu Yomid. Well, how is that? So Rashi explains it, because it says nefesh kitishba. That's riba kosher. If you swear anything, lahar lahativ is a miyad. Okay, it's a miyad a little bit. What's a miyad? The Ribu Yomid itself could be like a klal protocol, only something which is on the future. I'm going to do something positive or negative. Then it says l'chol asher yivate, another ribui. So he says when there's a ribui, a mere ribui, you're only mamat a little bit. Klal prat is different. Klal prat means this: I have a generalization, and then I have a prat, a detail. So we have a rule. If it only says a klal prat, what's the rule? Ein b'chlal elamashu prat. There's a generalization, and then there's a detail telling you that it only applies to this detail. If it's klalu pratu klal, then the extra klal at the end includes anything like the prat. The prat is the detail. Anything like the prat. So if you learn klalu pratu klal, it's anything like the prat. What do you mean like the prat? The prat is lahar lahatif in the future, positive or negative or positive in the future. So he'll learn only that would be Rabbi Shmuel's shita. That when it comes to Shavuos, you're only chayav coming over the area if you're swearing about the future, not if you're swearing I ate a sandwich yesterday or I didn't eat it and I lied about that. It doesn't apply. It only applies in the future. So he says that's klalu pratu klal. But Rebbe, why does Rabbi Kiva hold that it only applies both in the future and the past? Because he darshans ribu miyat. In other words, ribu is a amplification. Miyat is a limitation, but another ribu comes and tells you, and it means everything except for one thing. What does he exclude? He excludes if I swear I'm going to be mevatel a mitzvah. You can't swear about that. You can't, because you're already mushba v'amei Sinai. So you'll say the ribu yomit that it talks about by Shavuos. Again, nefesh kitishba, that's the ribu. Lahar leitiv is the miyat. L'chol shvate is the ribu. So it's not like klalu pratu klal, that it's got to be something like the prat, meaning just like the prat is the future, anything you swear about in the future, that's what applies. That's how Rabbi Shmuel will learn. Rabbi Kiva says no. He learns at ribu yomiyat uriba. So it's an amplification, and you only limit it a little bit. So you limit it to one halacha, nishba levatel as a mitzvah. So back in the Gemara. So Rabbi, at the end of the parentheses, Rabbi Kiva, my time and become. Why does he even chayv l'shavar? Why does he say chayv all four, both two in the future, two in the past? Darsh ribu miyad. Rabbi also darshans ribu yomiyad. So if Rabbi darshans ribu yomiyad, he'll also hold the four. So that's what we're trying to say. That our Mishnah goes like Rabbi. You don't have to say Rabbi went like Rabbi Shmuel in one case, Rabbi Kiva in another case. No, he went. We said already that he went like Rabbi Shmuel in the case of Tumas Mikdash for Kachav, that there's all four because he darshans it different than Rabbi Kiva. But he holds like Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi will hold like Rabbi Kiva when it comes to the Shvua, because he darshans Ribu Mit like Rabbi Kiva, including everything, both future and past. Rabbi Nami Dorish Ribu Mita, the Tanya, Rabbi Omer, B'cholpa. Where do you find elsewhere that he paskins this way? The Rabbi paskins that what? That darshan Ribu Mit. We have a pasuk when you redeem your firstborn male boy. What do you pay? 5 shekels, right? 5 shekels to the Kohen, right? Does it have to be shekels, or can I give him an IOU? Kurt owes me 5 shekels. I have a new baby here. Can I take that IOU that I have on Kurt and give that to the Kohen? Right? It's an IOU. So the pasuk says, "Uftuyav mi ben chodesh tifta." Once he's a month old, you redeem him from the Kohen. Be'erkacha kesef chameshes shkolim shekel, because 5 shekels. That's from Gerahi. But it says, "Uftuyav mi ben chodesh tifta." Ftuyav and tifta are mentioned first. Let's see the Gemara. The Tanya Rabbi Omer b'chol poden b'choradim, you can put it in chutz m'shas, except you can't use an IOU. Can't use a star. I can use something that has value, but a star, an IOU, has no intrinsic value. Rabbanan Amri b'chol poden b'chor adam They say you can include everything. You can include everything, but they exclude more. You can't give an evet. Let's say evet's worth 5 shekels, or a shtar that he agrees with Rebbe, and karka. My time, but Rebbe, what's Rebbe's reasoning? It says uftuy ben chodesh. That's a bipodim, anything. That's a reboy. That's a amplification. That's a miyut. Only 5 shekels. That's a miyut. You limit it to that. Nothing else. Then it says tifta, another tifta, which is an amplification again. Chazavariba. So we have a reboy miyut variba. Riba call, you include everything. My riba, you include everything. You can be part of anything. I want to give him a computer mouse. It's worth 5 shekels. I can give him that too. My miyut shtaris. The only thing you can't give is shtaris, because shtaris we'll see have no intrinsic value. Because you would limit, what is the thing you're most likely to limit? Something that has no intrinsic value, like a shtar. Okay, now the problem here is that it says if chodesh first, then it says tifta. The second amplification is right after tifta. The miyut of berkach gesel is only afterwards. We're going to come back to talk about that. In other words, we're going to see that Rebbe only uses the drush of ribu miyut in certain cases. He holds of kol prat. But where it says ribu miyut, and then you stick the miyut in between the two ribois, that's where he says you hold ribu miyut. But otherwise, he would generally learn of klal prat. But at this point, we're saying the Rebbe holds ribu miyut riba, like Rebbe Kiva, and therefore he would say that Shavuos applies to all cases, both future and past. My ribu become my miyut shtaris. For Rabbanan, the Rabbanan disagree with Rebbe in that case of the pidyon ben. Right? What do they darshan? Why do they say no? You exclude even avodim and karka. Rabbanan darshi klal prat. Uftuya mi ben chodesh klal. Right? That's a generalization. Prat. That's a detail. Tifta. Then another generalization. Chazav kol parakat yet on elkein prat. Ma prat mfurish davar abtat l'guf. What is the prat mfurish? What is 5 shekels? Number one, it's something which is metalflin, it's movable. Number 2, it has intrinsic value. The money has intrinsic value. So it's got to be something which is movable and has intrinsic value. Yatsu karkos, that excludes karka because karka is not movable. Shed metalflin. Yatsu avadim excludes avadim. Why shukshal karka? Because they are compared to karka. So that's the end. And yatsu stars, they also exclude stars like Rebbe does. Even though they're metalflin and gufamamon. So the Rabbanan say that you have to be put with something that's similar to the 5 shekels. The 5 shekels is movable, has intrinsic value. Karka is not movable. Avaram is like karka, and shtaros have no intrinsic value. However, Rebbe says no. The only thing we're going to buy is shtaros, because you have a ribu yomiyat ribu. It doesn't darshan called parakah. Darshan with ribu yomiyat. Therefore, you include everything except for one thing. You exclude shtaros. That's the thing that's most likely to exclude. Amalei Ravina Lameimar. So Ravina said to Meimar, wait a minute. Rebbe Darsh Ribu Amita? Do you really say over here that Rebbe Darshans Ribu Yamiyat and not Klal Prat? For Rebbe Klal Prati Darsh, he Darshans Klal Prat. So we're going to see in a minute the Tanya. Now we go to another area. First we talk about Pidyon Ben. We're jumping around Shas, right? We're talking about Shabbos today, Maris Legoim, Shavuos, right? Tumas Mikshah V'Katshav.
Said it has no intrinsic value.
Right.
But if you have a star, you can sell it to somebody.
Right, but it doesn't have
value.
Right. You could. That's right. You could sell some, but it itself, it doesn't have intrinsic value. There's no value in the paper. It's like toilet paper. It has no value. You have a piece of paper. It's like people say it's worth toilet paper. It's worth nothing. It has no intrinsic value. There's no value in itself. It has value because it could be sold. True, it could be sold for something, possibly to somebody. Somebody may not pay it. If you have an option that you want to sell me, I may not want to buy it. It may be worth nothing. Maybe worth nothing. Somebody told me every time yesterday that this Russian that he knows who does our alarm work, he stopped working because he was trading in bitcoins and he was making $1,000 a day until Trump's tariffs kicked in, and now he lost everything. He has to go back to work. In other words, there's some value sometimes, but sometimes it's worth nothing. So it doesn't have an intrinsic value. Something has an intrinsic value, it means something right there. Okay, so now the Gemara says, yeah, but you think Rebbe holds that way? So we've sort of solved it temporarily. He says, you know what? Okay, Rebbe holds his own shita. Rebbe holds like Rabbi Shmuel when it comes to Tumas Mikdash V'Kadshev, that applies in all 4 cases because he darshans supposed differently than Rabbi Kiva. Okay, and when it comes to Shavuos, he holds like Rabbi Kiva because he darshans Ribu Yomiyat. We don't find that he says it beferish, but we find that he also holds a Ribu Yomiyat. Says the Gemara, what do you mean? Rebbe holds a Ribu Yomiyat. We see otherwise. For klal prat darash, he darshans klal prat. The Tanya martseya. What's the case of martseya? When the Eved wants to stay on after the 6 years, you take him to the doorpost and you pierce his ear with an awl, A-W-L, right? I always say that. What's an awl? Lived in Mecca, didn't know what an awl was till I came here and I had a puncher, and the guy says to the Arab, Tavili et martseya, bring me the martseya, which is an awl. It's like a screwdriver with a point at the end. It's not a Phillips, it's not flat, it's got a point. So it says the pasuk says like martseya. Ain't no martseya. That's only if you actually have an awl. Menayla rabos. How do I conclude a sol? A sol is a sharp piece of wood, right? Asira is a thorn. Machet is a needle. Maktech is a borer. Maktev is a stylus. How do I know you can use any of those instruments to bore the hole? Tamam v'lokach. Kol davar shenukach. Anything that's taken. Biyad. Anything taken at Divrei Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda. He says anything that's taken biyad. The only thing he would exclude is what? Using a chemical. You can't put some chemical on his ear that's going to make a hole in the ear. You got to use an instrument. Okay. Rebbe Omer no. Martseya, Martseya, just like Martseya is unique. Shomat is made out of metal. Of course, it's got to be made out of metal. What's the machlokas here? Rebbe darish kol prati. Rebbe darshans klalu prat. Rebbe Yossi, Rebbe Yehuda darish ribui umiyah. Meaning, what does it mean? Rashi explains, the last Rashi on the page. Klalu prat. Lakach, this is lakachta. That's a general rule. Martseya is a prat. That's a detail. V'nasat bosno. And that's a general rule. Again, that's a generalization. Again, kol davar hanotun chazor kol ma prat mefurish. So if you learn kol prat, it's got to be something like the prat. Just like the martseya is a metal instrument. You can take any metal instrument. It could be a stylus, a borer, a drill. Anything that's you take in your hand and you make a hole in his ear. That's how Rebbe learns. Rebbe Yosef says no. He learns at ribui miyut. Lakach is a ribui. Martseya is a miyut. And V'nasat Bezo is a general rule, so you include everything except for one thing. You don't exclude a chemical. Rashi says some, like a poison or a chemical that'll put a hole in his ear. So what do you see over here? The Rebbe does darshan klal prat. If he darshans klal prat, l'chora he will darshan the pasuk of b'chol podin not the case of but our case of the shvua. What's the case there? Nefesh kitishba is a klal. Lahar relative is a prat. Only something negative or positive. And then l'chol shabate, a general rule again to say anything like not anything like the prat, just like the detail is the future. Negative or positive. It doesn't have to be negative or positive. It's going to be anything like that, but it's got to be a future. So it's going to only be the two, only in the future. If I swear I'm going to eat, I swear I'm not going to eat. Would not apply to the past. So that's the problem over here. So you see over here that Rebbe darshans klal prat, not ribu yomiyat, right? So that's our question. How do you say darshans ribu yomiyat? And he'll hold like Rebbe Kiva when it comes to Shavuos, and it applies in all four cases. The Chari also klal prat will only apply to two cases. So the Mishnah can't go like him. The Alma call prat. You're right. In general, the Gemara says the top line on Hey Amud Aleph. In general, he darshans klal prat, klal prat, and not ribuy miyad. And he would Taka say that klal prat, you don't include everything, only thing like the prat. The hacha and the taima. The reason over here, what's hacha over here in the case of Pidyon Aben, where Rebbe said you can include everything. You can be part of the kid with karka or avadim, you could be part of that. Why? Here we come to another area of Shas. Pasuk says in the fish that you're allowed to eat. What does the pasuk say? Pasuk says, "Ezet tochlu mikol asher b'mayim." This you can eat anything in the water. Kol asher l'snap v'kesses b'mayim. Right? Bayam v'cholim sometimes anything that has fins and scales, b'mayim, and then it says bayam v'cholim only in the darshan of bayam v'cholim in the rivers and the seas and the rivers. What do you mean by that? If you find something, a fish in the river or the sea or any moving water, it's got to have fins and scales. Let's say you have a little bore, a cistern that has no moving water, it's just water in there. Do you have to check if there's a little fish in there with fins and scales? No, you can eat it anyway. Because the rule of fins and scales is only in waters that flow. How do we darshan that? Because it's like this. It says b'mayim shnei pamim. Ein za klal prat. This is not a klal prat. Ela ribu yomiyat. Why? Because since the mayim it doesn't say klal and then a prat, and then the klal, because the klal is b'mayim, anything in water. Then it says kol is b'mayim, again the klal, and then bayam and cholim, the miyat that says that where must you have fins and scales only in flowing water. The prat is afterwards. In other words, yes, and that's generally dashan's klal uprat and klal uprat uklal. But if it's not in that order, if it's not klal uprat uklal, but rather klal uprat, then he dashens it as a ribu yumiyad. Rabbanan, Rabbanan will say no. The Rabbanan disagree and they say it's still klal uprat. When you find two clauses next to one another, hetel prat, and put the prat in between them. But don't klal uprat. Okay, so therefore, what are we saying here? In general, yes, Rebbe does hold the klal uprat, and therefore he's more limiting, and he would only say when it comes to Shavuos, only in the future, not in the past. He said by Bechor, as I mentioned before, what does the pasuk by Bechor say? It says, Uftuya ben chodesh tifte. Ftuyav is the klal, or the generalization, or the ribui, and then it says tifte again, the generalization, and then it talks about the echashav gasav. In other words, when does Rebbe hold of klal protocol? Generally, when it says klal, prat, uklal. But if it says klal, uprat, the others say no. Even in that case, take the prat and stick it between the two klal, so you have a klal protocol. Rebbe says no. If it's klal, uprat, then you darshan it as a ribu yamiyad. That's why when it comes to the fish, right? It says klal uprat, so we darshan it as a riba umiyat riba, and therefore you include everything. You could include everything, not just you're allowed to eat any kinds of fish you're limited to only to things that are in a cistern that has no flowing water. There you can eat even fish that don't have fins and scales. When it comes to poda, the firstborn, you can be poda with anything. Just one thing will exclude shtaros. That's it, but nothing else. So therefore, now the Gemara says, if that's the case, hashadamar Rebbe klal pratidar should be dashin prate klal. Meaning, but so therefore, if he dashes klal prat when it comes to nefesh ki tishba, lahara lahetiv, and lachol sheyivate, it's a klal prat klal. So you only include what's like the prat. The prat is lahara lahetiv in the future. So you wouldn't include the past. So the Mishnah can't come out like Rebbe. So balkorchach kasher shvuos. You definitely have a kasher shvuos. Our Mishnah says shtaim shein aber. According to Rebbe, it's only be two. Ela b'shvuos nasav alibid Rebbe Kiva v'leilos firlei. When it comes to Thomas Meshvakotchav, he himself holds like Rabbi Shmuel. He doesn't say he goes like Rabbi Shmuel. He himself holds that way, as we proved before. But when it comes to Shavuos, you have to say that the Mishnah went like Rabbi Kiva, even though he doesn't hold that way. Why would he say something like Rabbi Kiva as a Stam Mishnah, and if he doesn't hold that way? Because he said most of the Bnei Yeshiva held that way. To this general idea, though, Tan Rabbi Shmuel, B'mayim, Shnei Pam, the top Tosa says, wait a minute. If you darshan Ribi Miyat, where's that in the Yigul Midas? Tan Rabbi Shmuel is my Mayim. Tan Rabbi Shmuel himself holds of the Yigul Midas. How could he hold over here of Ribu Yomiyat? Tamas says Tosas, top Tosas Rabbi Shmuel, Tani Bi Gamamidas, Hatar and Dreshesman, Vikatfei, Hachmi the Shnei Klalos, Asmuch Madashin, Ribu Yomiyat. Even Kart Rabbi Shmuel, that Tosi asking me Nanu Bay. Tan Rabbi Shmuel himself holds that you learn this Ribu Yomiyat, but Tan Rabbi Shmuel doesn't include it in Yigul Midas. Some say that Tan Rabbi Shmuel is not the same as Rabbi Shmuel. Right, Rabbi Shmuel holds one way, Tan Rabbi Shmuel holds mine, but this is Tan Rabbi Shmuel. This itself is Tan Rabbi Shmuel. Some say, right, that here he says there's a Ribu Yomiyat. The Gemara says Tan Rabbi Shmuel. So how does that fit in with Rabbi Shmuel? Rabbi Shmuel Omer could be that Rabbi Shmuel is different than Tan Rabbi Shmuel. Tan Rabbi Shmuel is the yeshiva, the Tana of the Bei Rabbi Shmuel. And Rabbi Shmuel, what do we say every day? Rabbi Shmuel Omer doesn't say Tana Rabbi Shmuel, it's Rabbi Shmuel Omer. So Rabbi Shmuel holds of Yigul Midas. He doesn't necessarily hold of the Tana Rabbi Shmuel. Others say that it's Taka Machlokas, right? Here the Ritva says that, or some say Ritva says different. He says that Ribu Midas is included in Klal Protocol. It's a kind of Klal Protocol. Sometimes dash in this way, sometimes dash in that way. So that's one way to answer. Another one is that it's a Machlokas. Or he says the only thing that's included in Bishmol Omer is the things that there's no machlokas about. That's one reason why we say it every day, because we want to talk about things that are no machlokas about. That Bryce of Bishmol is only things that are everybody agrees on. Therefore, he didn't count Ribu Yomiyat in the Yud Gilma Midas, making it Yudal Midas, because that's a machlokas if we hold Rabbi Shmuel or not. Some, as we said, the Rabbanon here disagree, and they hold not like Tan Rabbi Shmuel. They hold, you always say Klal Parakal, you never dash in Ribu Yomiyat. But some rabbis like Rebbe Kiva, we said in one case, and Rebbe in certain cases, when it's a klal prod, will darshan as ribu yamiyat. So ribu yamiyat is a machlokas whether you darshan it or not. And the reason it's not mentioned in Rabbi Shmuel Omer either could be because Rabbi Shmuel is only talking about things that everybody agrees on, or because Rabbi Shmuel is different than Tar Rabbi Shmuel, or one of those reasons. But it is svara throughout Shas. Tomorrow's Gemara will start from your gufa menayin shein chayv el sheish b'ydiya v'chil sof. I will be away tomorrow and Wednesday. So tomorrow and Wednesday's daf will be on the podcast, and on Thursday, Meretz Hashem, we'll pick it up from the third line on Daf Zayin Amar Aleph. The third line on Daf Zayin Amar Aleph. Kol Tuv. Have a good day.
Take care.